competence and carbon neutrality in ESG, increasing stakeholder demands, and key regulations are as follows. Investors request ESG responses to climate change. This question raised by a asset management company is the question was, what is the most important ESG issue? Climate change was the most serious one. People responded. BlackRock asked a question out of ESG, what are current and future ESG interest areas of environmental social governance? Environment was what people chose. The orange shows their current interest, and so it shows all the more importance of the environmental factor. The outlook under carbon neutrality, BP's outlook shows it accounts for electricity 58.9%, and IEA, according to IEA, 49.3% is electricity. Renewable energy will account for 87.6% in the future. The electricity accounts for 49.3% and bioenergy 14.3% and hydrogen-based 9.6%, other renewables 4.3% and so on. The great transition has started. Out of 140 countries that emit 90% of the world's greenhouse gases have aimed for carbon neutrality. So let me give an example. EU carbon price has gradually increased. Carbon market price as of February this year reached almost 100 euros. Because of Russia-Ukraine war, it has dropped shortly, but it has rebounded back again. Some of the carbon neutrality examples, and the first one we are looking into is the US. Joe Biden, after his inauguration, Build Back Better Act has been proposed. Last December, 1.2 trillion infrastructure investment, Jobs Act passed in the House of Representatives. What's noteworthy is SEC this year, March this year, proposed the rules concerning mandatory climate change disclosures. Scope 3 was included. Public consultation will be underway. As you are well aware, Fit for 55, there are a lot of important factors we need to look at. CBAM is the CBAM. What it stands for is it links carbon and trade. So it tries to impose price on carbon emitted in the manufacturing process for products imported to the EU. CBAM certificates based on weekly EU ETS auction prices will change, and then it will be set according to this. Iron and steel, fertilizer, cement, aluminum, and targets. These are the targets, and the targets will be expanded in gradual phases. Another thing that we need to consider is the stricter draft is being proposed. Five industries I have mentioned, they are about to add more industries for from 2023 to 2025 for 3 years. Oh, it is going to shorten pilot period from 3 to 2 years. The free allowance under EU ETS from 10 years previously will be shortened to 4 years. It is a stricter adjustment, and currently it is being discussed. Countries such as Russia, who that imports a lot of products to EU, will have a serious damage on their trading. It is expected to affect our country. China's carbon neutrality China has claimed carbon neutrality by 2060. It is gaining worldwide attention. To reach this goal, they have to come to the peak in 2030 and carrying out the phase down, have to phase down the carbon emission. Their technological confidence is the foundation for this goal. EV battery installment and solar PV module output volume wind turbine installment. All these industries, we on the slide, 10 biggest corporates on the list, and a lot of the corporates are from China, and the figure is constantly changing. But most of these conglomerates and corporates are from China. Korea has claimed carbon neutrality. The, the new incoming government has pledged to sustain NDC. But they believe there are other measures and tools to implement this goal, so they will make adjustments to the existing denuclearization, NDC, and other factors. Other than this government's goals, other corporations have switched to the great transition. Various stakeholders have requested and demanded the great transition. Global asset management companies that pledge carbon neutrality, the asset amounts to $43 trillion, not Korean won dollars, which is a massive amount. By corporation, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, the global conglomerates have claimed carbon neutrality. Microsoft, aside from carbon neutrality, they have pledged to eliminate prior emissions by the company, which is called carbon negative by 2050. As of January, 5,235 corporations have joined this movement. This is something we cannot avoid. is something that all the companies in Korea have to consider and join. This is the global trend. And the second one is increasing stakeholder demands. And oil companies are the examples that I want to show you. Shareholder of these oil companies have demanded the change. ExxonMobil is the first example. At the shareholder meeting, NG number one, hedge, act, activity focused hedge fund. Three of four external directors have been requested to be changed. Three external directors are experts in clean tech and new businesses. And they have required midterm and long-term goals. Scope 3 should be included. Scope 3 is all the it includes all the carbon emissions in the value chain, all the even the subsidiaries and the companies that produce components. Scope 3 emits bigger amount of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases than Scope 1 and 2. Scope 2 should include Scope 3 in the long term. These are the shareholders' demands. ESG and carbon neutrality, Scope 3, are something that shareholders have shown their interest to. And then the next example is NGOs' demands. Shell, in case of Shell, last May there was a court ruling. A Dutch court by 2030 has ruled to achieve 45% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. Back in April 2019, Friends of the Earth Netherlands, that's the non-governmental organization, they have filed a lawsuit demanding net zero to Shell by 2050, and the Dutch court have accepted their demand. And this is the first time that the court has accepted NGOs' demands. Because of the time limit, we are going to move to the next one. Total Energy, Greenpeace, a lot of environmental organizations. In Europe, they have claimed that they had violated European Consumers Act. Fossil fuel industry, because this company has invested a lot of money into fossil fuel. NGOs' demands have been requested. Youth group have also filed a lawsuit. Demands to reach carbon neutrality has been raised. In case of Korea, Korean oil companies such as SK Innovation S-Oil, Hyundai Oil Bank, and GS Caltex have plans. SK Innovation Net Zero Ambition is the project they have announced. Scope 1 and 2 emissions, they decided to achieve net zero. RE100 and offsets, Through this, they will attain the goals. S-Oil, together with Samsung Logistics, they have made partnership. Hyundai Oil Bank, they decided to expand renewable energy and eco-friendly businesses, and they will decrease the uh, production by 2025. Biodegradable materials, they are going to enter into these markets. And we have Korean oil companies taking part in this movement. What can we learn from these leading companies? The first one is stakeholders have requested a path to carbon neutrality, so we have to consider their common interest, scope 1 and 2 and 3. And we have to set up short, midterm, long-term goals. We have to build internal consensus. Carbon neutrality may show temporary like low financial statements, but support of the board directors and employees need to agree to sustain this. And the last one being monitor leading companies and regulations. There are a lot of changes taking place around the world, and policies, regulations, global regulations. We have to monitor other examples: carbon pricing, taxonomy, CBAM. There are trends that we need to keep an eye on. There are many regulations, but because of the time limit of 20 minutes, I'm going to show you the examples of taxonomy and DD. First, Ministry of Environment published K taxonomy guidelines to prevent greenwashing. They want to figure out if the practice manufacturing is green or not. These are the standards if the companies are going green. There are 6 goals in this in compliance with environmental standards. We have role modeled EU 1, greenhouse gas reduction, adaptation and sustainable water conservation, resource circulation, pollution prevention and management, and biodiversity conservation. And these are the goals that corporates should follow, and these are investors should consider. Formalization of EU taxonomy in EU have a similar one, 6 goals. Korea has proposed and published ours first. EU taxonomy will take effect next year, January next year. Due diligence. So to find out if the companies are abiding by the standards, some companies might exploit labor, and when they exploit or mine coal, they have the standards to judge their carbon neutrality activities, and America has introduced this, and UK, France, Netherlands have adopted a due diligence accordingly. EU is they have strict method and methodology imposed for the companies in EU, and they will expand their uh, applicability to companies from other countries or factories inside in EU. And then liability for damages, fines, sanctions on companies will be imposed that affect the environment, human rights. And this is my presentation. Let me quote Bill Gates. He published a book named How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. According to him, bad news, getting to zero will be really hard. Good news, we can do it. He have emphasized the following three things. The first one being we have to get to zero greenhouse gas emissions. The second one, we have to adopt the tools to make it faster, to accelerate. The third one is breakthrough technologies. The result is to build companies that build great zero carbon companies will be the leading countries in the coming decades. And this is it. Thank you so much for your listening and attention.
Thank you for the presentation. Now, lastly, we have the last presentation by Professor Byung-Seol at Ina University. Good afternoon. I'm Byung-Seol at Ina University. I'm going to talk about carbon neutral and urban planning. To address carbon issues, I think the cities need to change. When developing and designing cities, how to reduce carbon and how to absorb carbon dioxide. That's what we need for city planning. So within the city planning, we need to internalize environment. That's the important part. So in terms of carbon neutral, as you know, to touch upon the concept, it means to reduce human-induced emissions as much as possible and increase absorption to achieve net zero. And GHG has been increasing continuously, so China and America are emitting the highest amount in the global share. China is taking up 26% of the total, and globally, a lot of countries are emitting GHG. There are natural GHG and human-induced GHG. And these human-induced GHG are from humans burning fossil fuels, emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, which causes the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is increasing, and annual average is average temperature of the surface is increasing. So, as you can see in the picture, within the inside the circle is in the past, and the outside is recent 30 years. And as you know, the start of spring is happening earlier, and also summer as well. And the number of summer days is increasing by 20 days, and winter days decreasing by 22 days. And there are changes in seasonal characteristics, and the biggest contribution to this is greenhouse gases. So international community is making great efforts, and within the Kyoto Protocol's regime, the sixth IPCC working group report is to be released. The biggest significance of Paris Agreement is all 197 members are subject to reduce GHG, and which is a bottom-up method. So we need to voluntarily reduce greenhouse gases. So we have this 1.5 degrees Celsius special report, and the sixth working group evaluation report say that within 20 years, 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, the possibility to reach that is very high. Based on this, as Professor Yoon mentioned earlier at the keynote speech, this graph, in 2030, we need to reduce 40%, and then in 2050, we need to reduce it sharply to reach the goal. So it requires great effort.
So in 2030, we have to reduce 40%. This is an aggressive goal, ambitious goal. In this circumstance, we need to revise the guidelines for establishing city. When coming up with city or county basic plans, we have to consider carbon emission. We have to survey the characteristics of local economy, and greenhouse gas status is something that we need to survey before coming up with plans. And 5-year plan should be submitted by local government, and this is the guideline. The city plan hasn't considered these factors, and absorption and emission are something that should be involved in the plan, and it will lead to the integration of nature and spatial planning. To do so, we start to map the current status to figure out which area has how much carbon emission, which area generates, and what kind of industry generates carbon emission. So this map should be utilized when planning for spatial space and buildings. There are there are so many plans that can utilize this mapping. I'm going to show you some examples that are directly related. Transportation renovation is something that we should consider first. Means of transportation should be um, renovated, and road types and vehicles. EV Expo is the event today. Eco-friendly means of transportation. For that, we need to take a bicycle, and we say it, but uh, we we don't fully utilize it because we don't have the means, roads dedicated to that. Bicycle road in Korea have been created, but in other countries such as Copenhagen and Berlin, the roads encourage people to take a bicycle. So bicycle highway in Copenhagen is only dedicated to bicycles. Berlin, al along bicycle road is next to the road for cars. So the importance of the bicycle has been dealt with similarly. So no people will have access to the bicycle road. The physical designing should be accompanied. Green buildings, new buildings. In 2025, zero energy is the duty. Transportation and land ministry have rolled out many uh, policies. So expansions of carbon sinks in houses such as by remodeling. The biggest, the widest garden inside the city is somewhat similar to a theme park. Singapore Changi Airport has features such as waterfall, rainforests, so people are exposed to uh, forest in the city. No one, energy zero housing. For the for over 4 years, they have set five big factors: energy source, uh, warming, uh, heating, including heating and cooling. They have established the plan according to Energy Zero. It started in 2013. This is the leading example in Korea. This show uh, urban forest green remodeling, have encouraged green remodeling across the nation. So air circulation, ventilation, it doesn't only apply to the buildings, and it should be applied to the city itself. And wind corridor should be considered in planning. The breeze from Mount Pukan creates feel-good air circulation, and so the system that brings a breeze into the city and apartments and buildings, those can take advantage of the system. It's not everywhere. A wind takes a certain path, and then we have to open up and consider those elements in planning. And so mapping the path of wind, and the red area shows the path a wind blows. When constructing buildings, they need consultation in the field of climate, and these can be the strategies, the ambitious ones for green new project. In Gosang, they are creating greenery area in the city. Railway should go underground and above it, and their U-shape forest area is being built above it. And the whole city can be linked to greenway, and we shouldn't just make parks or forests in the remnants. We should uh, initially consider these important natural elements in planning cities. Another thing we emphasize is compact city. Compact city is really important. Jeju Island, over exploitation or development of buildings on Jeju Island. Development is what we need, but conservation is another thing we consider. So we have to make a balance, strike a balance between development and conservation. So intensity, as you see on the picture, is important. And station, urban management in the station area, and public transportation. And Brazil, Curitiba is the city, and then I have personally been there. Bus road in the in the downtown area. There are buildings next to it, and a remote area. There should be some greenery area, and which can that's called transit-oriented development. The public transportation uh, should have easy access. A little ago, the former vice minister has mentioned water circulation. Water circulation is another factor. We have to link the water circulation. This should be involved in the city planning. To adapt to climate change, we need to well manage the water resources. Ministry of Environment is to legislate water resources, so integrated management system and water circulation. They're putting efforts to come up with laws, regulation, rainwater storage. In Seoul, impermeable rainwater accounts for over 80%. So when it rains a lot, it causes flooding. Hard rain causes a lot of problem in the city. It poses a lot of risks. water circulation is encouraged and legislated, we can avoid this problem. We have to start from pilot projects. In case of Gwangju, Jeju, Ulsan are the leading water circulation cities. Gwangju has a street dedicated to water circulation, specialized water circulation. It strengthens parking lot, rainwater from 85 to 32%. It has decreased the rainwater. What's more important is a new city can reduce cost and heightening efficiency by taking this into consideration. In China, Sponge City project is an example. When it rains, it permeates and goes into the underground. These are the meaningful projects. I can emphasize renewable energy more because International Green Island Forum jointly is hosting this workshop together with Asia Climate Education Center, Carbon Free Island. This project, they have carried out this project and it has expanded its efforts from that experience. Kappa Island, back in 2013 or 2011, they have gone through difficulties to develop wind power generation. The transition projects to renewable energy, they are trying to complete. Kappa Island is something that I'm hoping to flourish. The theory and the mechanism on Kappa Island, it has great potential. So we have a lot of constructive criticism on the island, but it shows a good example. Carbon-free island, it should be beyond the island. It should be a city that achieves carbon neutrality. Photovoltaic power plant is in Asan City. This is the energy self-sufficient village. Energy independence should be a target that every local economy and government should pursue. There are new renewable energy buildings around the world. Masar in Arab Emirates, it is where a lot of oil is um, is being imported, but they don't use oil at all to when building and maintaining those buildings. Renewable energy should be applicable to buildings. Some of the projects I have implemented and is Ganghwa, in the beginning stage before it became a big city. Urban regeneration and the King's Road. So it was the parking lot covered with cement, but we have created forest, regenerated rundown buildings. The new city should apply eco-friendly methods, but the existing cities have to convert to eco-friendly cities, adapting these elements. High Line was an abandoned um, road and nobody visits, but by remodeling this High Line, uh, has attracted a lot of people and boosted the local economy, and people come here to enjoy the nature, and after lunch they come here to enjoy the beautiful scenery. This is a great idea. One simple idea has transformed a lot of factors, including new job opportunities and tourism. It has had a great impact on the city. So we have to start looking for rundown buildings and deserted areas, and we have to impose or add. We have to add. Um, we have to create added value out of those places to reduce carbon. We need energy experts, but we need other experts from other industries, transportation, buildings. Uh, Together, we can come up with ideas uh, that consume less energy. We have to put together our heads to come up with eco-friendly ways. Uh, So the bottom-up method system of Paris Agreement is something that we need to follow. So transportation, we have, that's my personal opinion. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for the insightful presentation. This is all for the session 2 presentations, and we were going to have a 10-minute break, but now it's shortened to 5 minutes. After that, discussion will be presided by Jung Dae-yeon, Director of the Asia Climate Change Education Center. I'll see you back in 5.
So the discussion is the last to proceed. In the morning, we have discussion in the morning. I apologize for coughing. We have we have had three presentations in the afternoon. Based on those presentations, we have invited three panelists. The further left from me is Darren Southcott, a visiting professor at Jeju National University. He's from England. He has to return to England. He's going to take a leave of absence um, the second semester this year. Cambridge. Let's give him a round of applause. The next is Lee Young-woong, director of Korea Jeju Foundation of Movement, and then Professor Byun Byung-seol. Professor Chakma will appear on the screen. There is another um, panelist, the former director of Ministry of Environmental Conservation, and he is a liaison of Jeju government dispatched to UNESCO. Could you please say hello? Can you hear me? Yang Kim, liaison of Jeju government dispatched to UNESCO. Could you please say hello? Maybe we cannot hear him from our side. Maybe the mic, there's an issue, technical issue there. He can apparently hear us, but we apologize. We are sorry that. Can you raise your hand if you can hear us? But we cannot hear him. I think he's muted now. Could you please turn on the microphone, please? Would you unmute your microphone, Yang Kim? Check mark.
If you can hear, would you please raise your hands up? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah. 그러면
Next, we are going to proceed. We have to make sure if we can hear Yang Kim, the the former director of Environmental Conservation of Jeju Special Self-Governing Province. Could you please say a few words? Could you please test your own mic? We cannot hear you. Now we can hear you. Yes. We'll proceed the discussion. Today's topic, as you know, energy and transition, climate change. It is one of the environmental issues. It is when considering the huge impact on nature and people, this is one of the biggest issues that damage a human, and it is a hot topic across the world. The relation with energy, the anthropogenic greenhouse gas is from 80% is from energy. If we deal with the problems of this, we can solve the problems that have been proposed. And keynote speaker Sun Jin Yoon has introduced carbon neutrality is something that all the nations around the world trying to achieve. There are three words: lower carbon, carbon neutrality. The last one, carbon free, carbon zero. They are similar, they are linked, but strictly speaking, they are somewhat different from one another. Low carbon means anthropogenic emission rate should be lowered by 10%, 20%. Why 10%, 20%? Without no scientific ground. It's to mitigate climate change. This is something we should do. If we carry out low carbon, go for lower carbon, it mitigates the speed of green greenhouse gases emission, and this is something that we uh, we implemented a long time ago. Carbon neutrality is the net zero, considering emission and absorption of a carbon emission. So net zero is applied to this. So climate change will continue by achieving this, but the current situation doesn't get worse. Low carbon gets it worse, but it slows down um, the emission. Carbon zero, carbon free is we need to lower the emission than absorption. Pre-industrial level, we are going to recover to the pre-industrial level. So there are some differences among these three words. So depending on what we focus on, the policies differ. Um, like adaptation policy in Bangladesh and carbon neutrality in other region. This have been presented to you today. Bangladesh, so it is a developing country. So they they are so they are not taking advantage of carbon neutralities because they are still developing. If there are other comments or remarks, we can ask you later. for the next 30 minutes. I'm gonna give each one a mic um, to ask a question or make comments.
Hello. Should I ask all three questions at once and then hand the mic back? Yes? Okay, I'll do that. Okay. Okay, first of all, thank you very much to the organising committee for inviting me to join the discussion. I can't comment on the technicalities of the presentations, which were excellent and very informative, but I would like to request additional information through a comment within which there is an embedded question. So first of all, I'll direct this to Professor Chakma. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's really important to hear from a country such as Bangladesh, which is at the front lines of the battle against climate change, especially important to hear the role of climate change in driving additional processes such as urbanization and slum growth, which you mentioned, that we don't often think about when we think of the um, weather and natural disasters hitting countries like Bangladesh, driving further processes which contribute to climate change in a cycle. And also in connection with rural resilience, you mentioned the agricultural adaptation policies. Many people have mentioned the situation in Ukraine, and this has been mentioned in presentations in today's session and in other sessions, especially the rising price of oil and fertilizers. And of course, Bangladesh relies on imports from Russia and Ukraine as well. So this will hit rural communities potentially as well. So in that light, for Bangladesh, this might also create further impacts. And so my question is, in relation to the geopolitical context, what impacts could there be on the agricultural adaptation policies introduced with rising costs and potentially food shortages? Is it possible the government could cut back on those adaptation policies? Do you foresee any problems to the policies that you introduced today due to this geopolitical context? Okay, and so I'd like to direct a question also to um, Minister Yun, Councillor Yun, who is not here, but I'll read my comment, and maybe if we discuss a related topic, it might be relevant. I was really interested to hear about the various carbon emission policies, particularly confronting carbon emissions through consumption, which we often overlook, has been overlooked in many carbon neutral policies. Mainly we look at production. Countries like the UK, where I am from, focused on production. We are deindustrializing, so it's easy to focus on production because we are winding back our industrial growth. So it's easy to offshore carbon emissions. So you introduced the example of the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. This was actually agreed in March by the EU Council, so that's very recently been agreed. And as you mentioned, it will function in parallel with the ETS system and covers various products. The main objective is to avoid carbon leakage through consumption and also encourage partner countries to establish comprehensive carbon pricing, also incentivize corporations to lower their carbon emissions in their domestic and overseas production. So in this light, what are the prospects for a CBAM mechanism in Korea? Are there any prospects for that? Is that on the horizon? Can we look forward to that in the future? I'm not sure if that was mentioned specifically, but I'd like to hear more. Of course, Minister Yun is not around to discuss that, so I'll leave that just to be discussed at a later point. Finally, to Professor Byun, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really interesting to hear urban planning set up in such a systematic way in Jeju, which you mentioned is one at the forefront of Korean urban planning, looking for its carbon-free 2030 objective. And it's good to hear that there are attempts to measure systematically the carbon emissions of cities due to their non-bounded and interconnected nature with other regions. Without the principles and targets of carbon neutrality throughout the society, it's difficult to really judge whether a city is truly carbon neutral or not. And the example of Jeju's carbon-free 2030 project could be a cautionary tale because of strengths but also weaknesses because of the nature of the industry here, which is a tourism island, so that we are still contributing to emissions specifically through tourism growth and population growth and the new airport as well. And this means the province would continue to significantly increase pollution and emissions if the values of carbon neutrality are not reflected cross-sectorally in a way that complements all other policies. And so my question in this light is, are there any independent agencies that can assess the strengths of carbon neutral plans at the urban level? In the UK, it's built into the Climate Change Act. We have the Climate Change Committee, which assesses, evaluates the government's plans. I know that's very specific to the UK, but is there an agency within Korea that can assess urban level plans and maybe give updates and reports on the progress of urban municipalities in how they are progressing in their plans? And do you think that's needed? Would that be helpful? I know in Jeju we have the Environmental Hub project, and some of that was relating to assessment of urban plans. So maybe you could comment, is that needed in Korea? Do you think it would be helpful? Okay. And sorry to continue so long. Thank you very much.
질문들을 우리 토론.
We are going to take questions from the people, and speakers and panelists will answer the questions they have been asked. So the director of Jeju Foundation of so we're gonna switch orders because we're gonna give the mic to Yang Bo Kim, liaison dispatch to. Can you hear me well? We can hear you too loud. It's nice to see you even through the screen. Thank you so much for your interest. Climate Change Forum today is more systematic. I feel great because of the great workshop put together by International Green Island Forum and Jeju Asia Climate Change Education Center. Vice Minister Yoon and Professor Byun and and uh, and all those important figures, despite difficult situations and your busy schedules. Thank you so much for coming. Chakma from Chittagong University. Thank you so much for your love and interest in Jeju. Um, as a person who's involved in administration, I would like to say that I'm going to give my 100%. I- I'm an expert dispatched to UNESCO, not a liaison. So, so this is, I'm going to share my insights in the international world. There are three factors talking about the Earth: climate, resource, and pollution. This year is a special year. Stockholm, back in 1972, there was a human environmental declaration. After that, UN-related agencies and NGOs around the world, Stockholm 50th anniversary. As a part of it, they have discussed and shared information and ideas and preparing to celebrate it. Paris climate agreement, biodiversity, post-COVID-19. So planning for climate change, adaptation to climate change. Uh, so we should have a big um, resolution and then ways to deal with the climate change. According to IPCC report, adaptation to climate change 2.5 2 degrees Celsius. This, we are not taking the right path to reach that. That's the information or ideas, opinions I get here uh, from the keynote speech. RE 100, carbon neutrality, and other phrases have become the norm. The COVID-19 pandemic experience, small change can seriously impact us, as you already know. Climate change is also called climate crisis. It's not something that happens temporarily. Because of COVID-19, we have a lot more limitations, but climate crisis is something that we should resolve and deal with in the long term. For the future generation, it is exposed to the future generation. So there are many and various issues and various experts, climate experts. The core lies in the energy transition, as Vice Minister, former Vice Minister has mentioned. We are adapting to climate change, and then we are reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. The yeah, Bill Gates has mentioned to adapt to climate change should be based on demand. The world is dealing with climate change in a similar way, but from my own perspective, I beg to differ. Uh, in case of Jeju Island, Jeju's climate change adaptation plan should be a little different. Jeju tourism is the biggest income source in Jeju. Geographically, uh, the island is vulnerable to extreme weather conditions. Uh, the life in, dependent on GS continues. Energy transition is not something that we pursue. We have to change our lifestyle. This is my personal point of view. Jeju is a special self-governing province, so it is easier to adjust the legislations, and that's something that I want to uh, share. It has to, the life pattern should be changed to move to carbon neutrality. Technology and economy are also important, but social system wise, we have to make it a long term. So social friend, so eco-friendly way is something that we should consider because of the characteristics of Jeju Island. Professor Byung-Seo Byun, has mentioned to me Professor Chakma, farming area is important. The adaptation to this, the farming area, this is important. Jeju energy transition shouldn't take the center stage. It should be one of the factors we should consider. The lifestyle is something that should be prioritized. Based on this, Jeju Island, urban life, we should reflect this into the policies, and then it should change the foundation of life, and it can lead to the carbon neutrality. The long-term goal based on this is important. The incoming government has introduced environmental contribution for fund people visiting Jeju Island. They should contribute to the environment of Jeju. They should join this system. Currently, I'm working at UNESCO headquarters. Employees go abroad. They take flights. Yeah, they take flights and on business trip. When civil officials or government workers, when they go to other places, they should contribute to the tax for the environment, and then this can go into environmental conservation. I a Swan example, special climate change education, special law regulations, ordinance can make this happen. Post COVID-19, the world leaders, what path will they follow? Precise diagnosis, future point of view. So they have to come up with future-oriented resolution. Global climate crisis for and the island itself. We need the preemptive diagnosis, the current issues now Jeju faces. And I would like to pledge that I would give my 100% to carry out those projects.
There was no comments or answers to questions. He mentioned about the fundamental strategies about climate change. Let me summarize the discussion points after other discussants' comments. I'm Lee Young-woong from Jeju Environmental Movement Coalition. As the professor mentioned before the start, define the concepts. In case of Jeju, is going for carbon-free island. In terms of climate change response, I think it is the strongest project in terms of concept. So I hope it goes successfully. But this kind of events would be major events to attract more support to achieve the goal. As I was listening to the presentations today, the proposals, I agree with them. So I'd like to make some comments and questions to add to the understanding. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Chakma about the climate change policies in Bangladesh. As you well know, Bangladesh has one of the smallest emissions in the world, but the damage and impacts on the Bangladesh people is great, and there's inequality. So I think Bangladesh is, at the country level, is preparing and implementing related policies, for other countries to move forward with the policies to succeed in achieving the policy goals. I think citizen participation is most important. So I would like to know the awareness or participation rate of the citizens in Bangladesh in the policies. And in terms of climate change response, expanding renewable energy was not included in your presentation. So if you have any information on policies to expand renewable energy or projects, and second speaker, former Vice Minister Yoon Jong-soo has left earlier. So rather than asking questions, I would like to make some comments. He mentioned about carbon neutrality and the roles of businesses. So a lot of large companies globally are declaring carbon neutrality and implementing their policies. And internationally, in economic situation, I think it's a biggest trend. So Korean companies need to participate, join this movement, but still the current pending issues within the local premises, there are conflicts. For example, Samsung or POSCO, they're promoting coal generation plants, and the residents are against it, and the government is not doing proper measures to stop this or address this. So that's what we're facing now. And Korean government's Korean carbon neutrality declaration is ongoing, but the incoming administration has pledged to abolish nuclear power plants. As Vice Minister Yoon mentioned in the beginning of his presentation, the prospect of energy mix, renewable energy share is the highest. But in Korea, if that's the case, then renewable energy uh, share is less than nuclear power plant generation. Because the new administration has declared that it will make Korea the strongest nuclear power plant generation country. So I think we need to look back on correct energy policies. And another thing is current administration as well as the new administration, the new airport constructions or second airports or Gadokdo or Saemangeum new airports, or there's one in South Chungcheong and Ulleung-do Island and Baekneung-do Island. Their new airports are being promoted. Then in this climate crisis regime, is this a proper response or is this a suitable policy? For instance, in France, the distance within 150, there's aircraft flight is banned. So I think Korean policies, these new airport projects are lag behind the international trend. And that's one of my concerns. And the presentation of Professor Pyun, I mostly agree with the content. There's nothing I don't agree with. But when we talk about city parks, when there are new apartments erected in the forest and the forests disappear, and he also mentioned the wind corridors. In Jeju recently, there are high-rise buildings, so that's also a concern for Jeju too. And there's a heat island phenomena in central urban areas, and the temperatures in the city is increasing. So any response measures to address this kind of issues are not enough, I believe. They should be reflected and thoroughly reviewed before put into a policy. And at the national level, the plan for carbon neutrality has been declared, and ministries and government agencies have been drawing up detailed plans for carbon neutrality. In the process of establishing these detailed action plans and executing these plans, I think the process is more important than the actual plans. So we need to have a plan, and then we need to have action plans, and there should be assessment, and so that desired effects will come out. Lastly, Jeju's carbon-free 2030 project is almost reaching the final deadline. So within this remaining timeline, as Mr. Kim Yang-bo mentioned, can see that he gave us insightful comments. I agree with him. I agree that the quality of life needs to be increased. Then what kind of policies are needed? I believe other decision makers understand and agree with this. So citizen-centered, resident-oriented policy should be made, which is a proper strategy to respond to climate change. That'll be all.
Thank you for your comments. We have um, we have gathered questions from three panelists. Expert dispatched to UNESCO Yang Kim. So former Vice Minister is not here. He hasn't asked any questions to the panelists, to the speakers, but he has shared his insight to propel carbon neutrality by adjusting the life of Jeju on the island. I will sum up questions for Professor Shakma.
Can you hear me? Yeah, now it's the time for you to answer. You got two questions from Mr. Darren and two questions from Mr. Lee. Okay. Then the two questions from Mr. Darren. The first one is you have presented about the adaptation policy in agriculture sector in Bangladesh. In relation to the adaptation policy, the agricultural policy in Bangladesh, what about the fertility? The first question was fertility, and the second one is production.
What do you foresee any challenges due to the geopolitical situation in Ukraine?
Okay. Well, then the other two questions from Mr. Lee is the first question was would you please explain citizen participation in the development of adaptation policy or in the process of implementation? That was the first question from Mr. Lee. The second question from him was you did not explain anything about the new and the renewable energy. So even though your presentation is regarded to adaptation, however, would you please explain what policies about the new and renewable energy in Bangladesh? Okay. Yeah. Would you please explain to the four questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Raising a nice question. First, who asked question me, that was what is impact on adaptation policy. Some of these are very adaptable taken by government of Bangladesh, and that is actually, if I mention that is policies, especially in agriculture, is too much adaptable for coastal areas people, for river erosion affected people. In 70s or 80 centuries, Bangladesh was four countries in terms of producing crops, producing fishes and another things. And another things that Bangladeshi people, almost 80% people are dependent on agriculture. That's why uh, Bangladesh government has taken some policies adapting to climate change induced hazard, like like here are taking here are inventing some crops for salinity tolerable salinity tolerable crops. That's why uh, that's why okay, another thing is you have know that we have enough experiences of poverty and famine, especially in if I say that is called Bengal famine. And it is because of low rates of production.
Excuse me, Professor Takuma, I'm very sorry for interrupting you. We have the time press, so this session should be closed at 3:30 Korea Standard Time. So would you please explain in 1 minute, okay? Very shortly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Another question is from Lee. That is participation of citizen in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh government trying to make more participation of mass people by television and by using radio. Bangladesh government also trying to aware mass people by local elected leader in the village areas. In this process, Bangladesh government has been trying to attach people or to award people in the village level. And another question is that is renewable energy. Yes, I'm sorry that it is also one is a very good, important part of in Bangladesh that Bangladesh government has already taken many process for renewable energy. Okay, thank you.
답변할 시간 없이
I'm sorry, we need to wrap up this session without summarizing the comments and the contents. Thank you very much.